All right, guys. So in today's video, we're going to be going over some of the common questions that you might have for your private pilot training, or if you're thinking about starting your training, these are some questions you might be asking, and I'm going to be trying my best to answer them as I've flown before and it can be difficult at times. So you want to know what you're getting yourself into. So the first question we have here is, how did you study for your private pilot license? Well, so first part, we'll go start with the ground stuff, and then we'll slowly move into the flight portion. So most schools have some sort of ground training program. My school gave me a King School online ground training course, so I used that to do most of my ground prep. Then another one I used was Gleim Aviation. This was mainly used to prepare for the written tests because they provide sample test problems from each of the categories where they're going to ask questions from. The most important book I used throughout most of my training was the PHAC, or let me type it out for you. Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. And as we move on to the flight portion, you'll also be using the PIAC a lot because we'll talk about some of the flight maneuvers you'll have to do. And this is a little bit out of order, but I'm going to mention that the next item that you would use a lot is the ACS, or Airman Certification Standards. So if you aren't sure if you're performing a maneuver properly, or if you are up to date on your knowledge, you can just check the Airman Certification Standards. It will tell you what you need to know and what you have to be able to do. And as you get closer to the check ride, feel free to take a look at your designated pilot examiner's website. So, as an example here, let's look at Scott Rolfing's website. So, and let's just go to their why did they fail section. So basically here, this examiner has posted a page saying why students failed and what you should not do on a check ride. He starts with talking about why certain people were not even eligible to start the check ride. This is exactly what you don't want. You don't want to show up unprepared or have all your documents messed up because as you see in the first line here, as a reminder, the candidate is still responsible for the test fee, regardless of eligibility or the outcome. So you might want to double check if you're recommending CFI that everything's in order. And then after the eligibility requirements, they talk about why did I fail. So it just talks about different places throughout flying where people mess up or what you should not do. All right, let's come back. So next part is we're going to talk about what was the most challenging part of the training. So for me, the ground training was actually relatively easy. I was actually able to go through most of the ground training with my instructor without much of him talking. So it was mostly just me. But the flying part really did get to me. It was not easy. So initially, it was just me having problems with getting the feel of the airplane because if you do something over time, you should be able to get the feel and not have to think too much. I was overly aggressive on the flight controls, which actually still is a problem today, and I'm still actually working on trying to become lighter on it. And the reason you want to be light on the controls is so you don't overcorrect or put too much input in for like a turn or a climb. Lastly, the problem I had was over reliance on flight instruments because most of your flying as a private pilot should be looking outside. So to deal with this part, like with the over reliance on instruments, I try to use the instrument to help me. So if I need to set like a certain pitch attitude, I can reference the instrument to set it, and then look outside and try to maintain that sight picture. So other than that, that's all I could really say about what was the challenge. It was just the flying stuff, getting the feel, and not being aggressive on the controls. So the next one is how many times did you get switched to a different flight instructor? So throughout your training, this could happen where your flight instructor goes off to the airlines or gets a different flying job, or you feel that your instructor doesn't seem to have the same teaching style that you want, so you might switch. So throughout my training, I have switched instructors twice. So after I finished my when I finished my private pilot training, I decided to make the swap because I wanted to try a different teaching style. But when I got to my throughout my instrument training, I had to switch the instructor again because my instructor went to SkyWest. So these are the most common times you would switch an instructor. One, it's not working out for you. Two, you want to try something new. Three, your instructor just goes to the airlines. So that could happen. It's not a big deal for the most part. When something like this happens, your flight school will try to pair you with another instructor as soon as possible. So after my instructor left, the manager at my flight school actually managed to pair me up with another instructor within that 1 week. Now I was able to resume my training again. So here's a bigger question here. How did you organize your flight planning information? So throughout your training, more of the responsibility is going to be turned towards you as you go further and further on. Initially, it's just the instructor checking the weather for you and say, hey, we're going to fly today or not. And then sooner or later, you're going to be the one deciding. So we've already talked about 1-800-WX brief and nav logs. But if you are unsure of how to organize it, you can reference the flight plan page on the backside where it has all these categories of weather. So you can write down weather for your departure, write down weather for the en route, then write down weather at your destination. And for looking at NOTAMs, you really got to decide what's necessary, what's not. So like if you're in the daytime and they're showing you a lot of obstruction NOTAMs and you're flying VFR, you can usually just ignore it. But meanwhile, at night, you may want to pay more attention to it because if it's unlit, you got to make sure you don't come in too low on an approach because you might hit something. And also for the unlit NOTAMs, if you're like in the mountains, you got to make sure you know where you are and not hit anything. The next section for NOTAMs is the instrument approach procedures. Because you'll notice them pretty easy. You'll say ILS, RNAV, all that stuff. You can ignore it as a private pilot. You don't need to spend time reading it. Airport closures or runway closures, I would write that down. And if you had a ForeFlight up, you can actually open up the diagram and start crossing stuff out. Since I'm not on my iPad right now, I'm going to go over to SkyVector and show you what I just mentioned. Okay. Let's come down to our home airport. Say we're leaving from Reed Hillview and we're going to Watsonville. And let's say for some reason that day, runway 20 was closed or a taxiway was closed. So when I open up my airport diagram on ForeFlight or you have a paper one, just simply take time to cross out the areas that are closed so you don't accidentally go there. So that's pretty much it for NOTAMs I can think of. So you want to take note of the information at your departure, your en route, and then your destination. If you have an alternate plan in mind, make sure to read the NOTAMs there as well. Another way to speed up the organization of your information is if you're trying to make a go, no-go decision, write down your personal minimums. Let's say you have a 5,000-foot ceiling, 10 miles visibility, 5-knot crosswind. If you know your limitations for options, you can eliminate some certain areas to look at. Let's say we wanted to make a short flight from Reed Hillview to, let's say, Merced. And you know that Castle's your alternate because it's really nearby. Okay, then check the weather there. Or just check nearby. Where else we have Los Banos, Madeira. So if you have your personal minimums, you can say, okay, this is where I want to go. If I can't go here, I'll go here, here, here. If none of them meet my minimums, I'll cancel. So that is actually a short way to end your flight plan easily. If you notice something that's out of your minimums, there's no way around it, you're done. So that next question is, how much is the training going to cost? So for me, the private pilot training actually costed 36 grand. And you want to guess? 120 hours, which is 3 times the FAA minimum of 40 hours. So before mentioning the money, I want to mention that nobody is able to, in these days, get your private pilot training in 40 hours. The national average actually has recently gone up. It used to be 60 to 70, now it's more 70 to 80, depending on how often you fly and how quick you learn. Well, unfortunately for me, I was disrupted by the pandemic, which resulted in me not flying for 3 months, so I got really rusty. But eventually I picked up the pace, and then things got good until I had to prepare phase checks and then your check ride. But so when you plan for your training, don't budget the bare minimum the schools give you. Try to budget at least. If the school actually gives you a good estimate of their average, use it. If the school doesn't give you that, try to plan out at least 2 times what is recommended. So the next question is, what kind of measures did you take or did you put in place to keep track of your training? Unfortunately, this was an area where I screwed up because even though the King's School app did have a record of all my flight training and what my instructor has checked and has not been checked, I didn't take the time to go through and read the syllabus on there because reading it would have told me what I needed still had to do and what I needed to prepare for. So if you have a syllabus and you notice that everything's been done pretty well and your instructor is still keeping you on the face, you know that something's up. So other than that, all I can say is what kind of measures you put in place. Look at the syllabus and keep track of what you've done each flight to make sure you're on track. And the last point I'm going to add is what private pilots need to know after obtaining a license. So when we talk about the mandatory recurrent training, the medical stuff, and additional out-of-pocket expenses you have to pay to stay current. So in your ground training, you should have already learned that every 24 calendar months, you'll need a biannual flight review. And that consists of 1 hour ground and 1 hour flight. That is just the bare minimum. Depending on how the CFI feels, he or she might spend spend more time with you. If you happen to obtain another certificate or rating, you don't have to do a biannual flight review and that clock restarts. The medical stuff, as a private pilot, you only need a third class medical. So just make sure you're staying in good health. And if you're below 40, make sure to renew your certificate every 60 calendar months. If you're out over 40, renew it every 24 calendar months. And additional out-of-pocket expenses, if you just want to get your private pilot certificate and be able to carry your friends around, make sure you stay current. So that includes doing your free takeoffs and landings in the 90 days. But that, again, is just a bare minimum, so you actually want to do more than that. Ideally, try to fly every week or every 2 weeks so you don't get rusty. And this is important because most private pilots don't have too much flight time. And I actually spoke to a CFI recently who told me that usually after you cross like 800 hours, it's hard to get rusty. So most of us are pretty far away from there. So we got to keep flying, got to stay current, got to stay proficient. So these are some of the questions that are commonly asked. If you had any, hopefully in the next video we'll talk to another pilot. But other than that, we'll see you, Dan.